ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. BIA Kelsey Live, the weekly podcast of local media and marketing. The cheers just won't stop. It's amazing. People love this show, and after only 5 weeks. So we're back again. I'm joined by Abid Chaudhry, senior analyst at BIA Kelsey, and Mike Boland, chief analyst at BIA Kelsey. And if you're paying attention, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I am the local on-demand economy analyst and also the chief product officer. Welcome back. So we always do a news update at this time, and that's where we're going to jump right in. First off, this week has been following on last week when there was an announcement of Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, amongst others, forming an artificial intelligence industry alliance to drive self-governance and regulation of AI. And this week we saw several things happen. First off, Google at a major hardware event on Tuesday had a number of home services that are AI driven, and in particular they showed their first female AI voice, which is certainly part of the Google master plan to bring the movie Her to life and hook us all forever. And then the second was there were several acquisitions this week that were and alliances that were interesting. So first off, Uber partnered with a company called Affectiva to work out delivering emotional intelligence in artificial or chatbots and artificial intelligence. And so that's a way of dealing with people in different kinds of stress situations. You can imagine them using those kinds of tools to do customer support when somebody's upset about a ride, for instance. But then the really big story, in my opinion, was the acquisition of what had been an open AI platform called Viv. Viv is essentially Siri without a platform. It's an open service, and you can send voices there to be translated, and Viv gives you the responses back as a developer. And I had been expecting this to be the open alternative to all of the platforms that we've seen developing around Google and Apple and Microsoft and others. Apple has Siri, Microsoft has Cortana, and now Samsung, the Korean electronics giant, who's having a lot of problems with phones bursting into flames these days, is the owner of Viv. Now, that closes the door to their open strategy. They're part of one of the other platforms. So, Mike, was this a good move on the part of Viv to sell itself to Samsung? And was it a good move for Samsung?
I think so. I'll take those one at a time, for Viv and for Samsung. So I agree with you. It kind of now closes them off. But I think at the same time, it kind of accelerates their growth potential much more than they could do on their own because, it provides reach and scale through a ubiquitous player like Samsung, which for Viv means more data, which really fuels the machine learning that it's based on. So, I think you guys probably know the background on Viv is that it kind of reprograms itself on the fly for different contextual situations. And that machine learning gets better over time and with the more kind of situations you throw it into. So being in bed with a massive global player like Samsung kind of accelerates the path to that scale. Now, for Samsung, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, everyone's going after AI. So this kind of competitive position for Samsung, gives it an AI play. We have Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. As we went over last week, all have different kind of flavors of AI strategies, and we'll go further into Google's in a minute. But Samsung's interesting because it goes beyond computing and mobile. We often forget that Samsung makes everything from like TVs to refrigerators. So I think this is a broader kind of Internet of Things play for Samsung, and Viv gives it, kind of a better front end that can really, I guess, operate across all of its devices. So I think that, another interesting kind of point to triangulate this is about 2 years ago. I think it was about 2 years ago by now. Samsung acquired a company called SmartThings for about $200 million, which really kind of triangulates its overall interest in bringing AI to all kinds of electronics throughout the home. That ties in with the Google discussion of what it announced on Tuesday, but I'll pause there in case you guys want to jump in on Viv.
Well, let me ask you, Abid, is it attractive to consumers to have multiple AI assistants, or are they going to want to converge on one AI that they really come to trust? And does that mean they have to buy the Samsung platform if they want BIV?
I mean, I think at some point, just like with autonomous vehicles speaking to each other, even if they're on different platforms, I think that's what's going to happen here. But I mean, I think the one thing that folks are kind of not talking about as much, but I think is the real story here, is that Samsung is very slowly starting to move itself away from Android. And in doing so, they've been investing a lot more in another open platform called Tizen, or Tinzen. I can never pronounce it properly. Yes, so I can see in the very near future that there's going to be a Samsung platform that includes a completely non-Android, non-connected to any other platform solution that includes BIV plus Tizen on Samsung devices. There's no more licensing fees to pay out to any other device manufacturers or device systems. And Samsung could very well, if it's smart, become a fourth pillar along with Apple and Google and Amazon in creating a scaled out operating platform for artificial intelligence as well as for mobile and for consumer appliances. And I think that might be something here that might be talked about.
And Samsung used to have before, in the pre-Android days, there was a short period where they had an operating system called Bada, right? Where it was on the kind of the short window where there were smartphones but not yet Android. They were they had their own play there, and they could get back to that. Sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
Well, and they're using WebOS on the TVs too.
Yep.
So they're already sort of multi-platform. But to your point, and I agree, consolidation is absolutely the right way to go from the design of a product perspective. But are we creating four silos where for a long time, these systems will not really be talking to one another because they're concerned about sharing the company gold, which is the data.
That relates right to the Google announcements. You want me to go into that? Yeah.
Well, so that's what I was next step. But I mean, do either of you think that consumers are going to make a decision based on the AI they have, or are they going to choose the product? And then I end up with an iPhone and a Samsung TV, and they don't talk.
Well, the one thing that if consumers are doing that right now, then everyone would be using Google, because Google's Google Now plus Google Assistant is by far the better AI than any other system out there. Then maybe Amazon's Echo, then Siri. So I think it's still going to come down to who's got the best marketing prowess, who's got the best, shiniest product. And then from there, as AI becomes much more front and center, maybe people will start to make a decision based on that. But us three probably will be making decisions based on AI. But normal human beings, they're not going to be doing that.
I totally agree.
So, Mike, was Google shiny enough with its announcements this week to become competitive in that way?
Kind of. And I agree with Abid that in terms of the data, the underlying data, the machine learning, the kind of algorithms, all that, Google has everyone beat. And just in terms of scale of the amount of kind of data that they have.
And the index.
Yeah,
and
if these things are going to be based just on the strength of the AI, I think Google's already won. But I think it's going to be more than that. But anyway, Google's announcement Tuesday was interesting because these were all things that they actually already kind of showed at Google I/O back in June. But they kind of rolled them out all at once on Tuesday in a way that kind of allows you to see them all together, which was interesting because it kind of clarified a bigger picture. So two things there. One, ties back to our white paper we did last year, which I mentioned last week, so I won't go into in too great a depth. But essentially, the move to mobile and the move to mobile apps means that Google has kind of search volume, query volume declines. So it's trying to counterbalance that in lots of ways in what it calls micro moments, so abilities to push people things in a predictive way throughout their day. In mobile, it's done that with Google Now, or what was Google Now, and Google Keyboard and a bunch of other things. So that's the backdrop. So Tuesday now gets them, I think, further down that path through now hardware throughout the home. So it's that like touch point in front of users for those micro moments, which is like hundreds of opportunities throughout the day to interact with people and deliver them stuff, again, to counterbalance the declines they're seeing in traditional search. So I think that's the play there. But it's also interesting now that we're talking about hardware, it brings in this interesting situation where it's kind of a platform play where, as you guys were talking about earlier, with the silos and the platforms, Google's now locking people in through hardware with the message that like all these tools will work better the more of them that you have. The more Google kind of Wi-Fi units you have in your house, or Google Home, and these things are all greater than the sum of their parts, which for the first time kind of gets Google into more of a hardware, less agnostic. It's always been very platform agnostic. This brings Google down the road of a very kind of Apple-like message, which was interesting to watch.
Yeah, well, and they are becoming Apple, and Apple is becoming Microsoft.
Yeah, right.
Or Salesforce is trying to become Microsoft. I haven't figured it out yet, but from a marketer's perspective, looking across the spectrum of AI right now, are we thinking about having to support 4 different silos now, or are we thinking about having to support an investment in a specific strategy, like investing in Google, to be connected the most?
I think it depends on each company's different strategy. Like in a lot of ways, Apple has broken down parts of the silos. Like on the iPhone, you can use Google Maps, you can use all these other things. Because Apple's strategy is to sell iPhone, to sell iThings. That's where its margins lie. So if it were to be totally closed and only allow Apple software on there, it would help the strategy for Apple Maps, but it would kill the larger strategy, which is to sell iThings. So I think we'll start to see, those kind of main objectives for different companies, for Apple at selling hardware, to define whether or not they're going to talk to other systems. If not talking to other systems will make their devices less attractive, they won't go down that road. For Google, it's more about being the delivery of content and going back to their kind of ad model. If they can do that in a way where they get in front of more people by operating on Apple devices, operating on other devices, then they will break down those silos. So I think those are going to be the decisions that are going to be made on an individual company level, whether or not they talk to the other platforms, and that's going to decide it.
I mean, but if you think about it, AI is not really AI. I mean, AI is not really intelligent if it doesn't speak to other AI.
Yeah, there you go. It gets better the more like
exactly
like I said earlier. The machine learning gets better the more kind of places it is. Good point.
Yeah, and I've seen some AI recently that is starting to try to interact with other AI and essentially pull off little bits of its DNA so that it knows what the other AI knows and then learns from the experience. So I think there's a huge and ongoing story here that we'll be talking about for many years. So let's turn the page to the next story, and that is an actual local on-demand IPO. We've heard that Uber and Lyft might do it someday, but they haven't yet. And Takeaway.com, which is actually a very significantly large competitor in Europe that has been around since 2000, went public last Friday on Euronext, which is one of the European exchanges, and topped out at about $25.82. Right now it is at $24.11, so it settled back pretty close to its original pricing. But it's worth $1.1 billion, and they raised $368 million in order to do additional funding. They've got a couple of competitors here in the United States. Grubhub, we know, which is public today. Just Eat in Europe has also been in the market for a while, and Delivery Hero, which is also consolidating delivery services all over the world, including Africa and Asia, are all seeking to take advantage of investors' interest in this market. And we know BIA Kelsey's been tracking local on demand for a couple of years. There's about $23.8 billion invested in directly in the on-demand space over the past 2 years. Now they're looking for their payout. Are there opportunities for more on-demand IPOs, guys? Have you seen companies that you think are ready to take this step? Takeaway took 16 years. What are we looking at in terms of local on-demand food delivery and local on-demand generally in terms of IPOs in the next 6 to 8 months?
I think it's going to require the scale that they had. Like you said, they've been operating for that time. They're still operating at a $13 million loss, but they have some pretty good revenue growth. And it's about network effect. So I think, that I always kind of laugh when there's just kind of this fatigue around food delivery apps and more of them coming out of the woodwork, because without an established position, that network effect is harder to reach because, most of them, the margins are so thin. And most of them have that message that reminds me of like .com era, like, we lose money on every transaction, but we make up for it on volume, which is always the joke. And, I get that it's about sacrificing margin for growth at early stages, building up a user base and, the balance in supply and demand, and then monetize once that network is in effect. And I think, we're looking at Takeaway.com taking 16 years to get there. And I think that, it's on a good trajectory. But I think for a lot of these other players, I don't know if there's enough market share to really get to that point. So I'm very skeptical of this space, but I think there are certain marks that some companies have that show it could be successful. I think Takeaway.com, the jury's still out, but it's showing some good signs.
Well, 7 million customers across Europe. That's not a huge number of people out of a population of about 380 million.
Well, also in Europe, the market is easier. It's easier to reach network effect in a place like Europe because the population density, more of the population of Europe overall is centered in urban areas as opposed to the U.S. where it's more spread out. And that's where that kind of I don't know, that supply and demand kind of flywheel really starts going when you're talking about urban areas and with a lot of on-demand players. So I think that the market there is a little more fertile to kind of create that network effect that's needed.
Abid, what do you think?
I think that Takeaway was able to capitalize on the excitement around on-demand and the cash that it has around, we've been around for 16 years. We're well established. By the way, we want to go public when we're running at a near profit almost. That's probably the reason why the IPO was as successful as it was. I don't anticipate that would be repeatable with other types of companies that are not as old or that don't have as much of a presence in Europe itself, or even in the other, even the U.S. market for that matter.
A lot of froth though right now. Grubhub's up 100% since May.
Yeah.
Simply on speculation. Do we anticipate any other IPOs coming out to take advantage of that kind of excitement right now? I mean, we know Uber's not going to do it.
I don't anticipate it, but I'm glad you mentioned Grubhub. That's the other thing I wanted to say about Takeaway.com. I think that their overhead is a little bit less. It helps their margins because they not like you look at companies like Deliveroo and Uber Eats, and they're actually on their balance sheet is like these large operations with actually delivery and all this other stuff. Takeaway is really just a kind of a middleware in terms of connecting customers with businesses, utilizing those businesses' existing infrastructures and delivery channels. And that's actually the same thing that Grubhub does. Those are the two players that do it that way.
So when we had Uber Eats at the conference, the Now conference in Seattle a while back, they were talking about their main challenge being food safety, which I don't think a lot of people take into account as they think about the risks for these businesses. And that means inventory risk. Your food is going to be spoiled or cold by the time it's delivered, and that ends up costing you all the revenue because you give it away. Many of these businesses assume that this is middleware with no additional implications. And what they're discovering is there are a lot of other implications. Uber's having trouble with driver retention, Uber Eats with food safety. Grubhub has had problem with, they've had problems with promotional offers that went wrong, and they've also had the food safety issues just as they deliver. But because they have so clearly separated themselves from the makers of the food, because all they do is the takeaway part of it instead of actually saying we deliver your food from the source. They aren't taking on as much risk as a lot of their competitors, so they may be running this business in a more lean and smart way than other companies. So
yeah, it's ripe for complexity in an area where the margins are already so thin, and that really just kind of comes into quality control and just opportunities to decimate that margin even further.
Well, and logistics, the ability to just tune these systems so that your costs are as low as possible, but you're still doing all the things you need to do for the customer. And we've a lot of on-demand has sort of ignored the other human part of the equation in many of these cases. I think that's where we are now. The fact that there are insurance services, savings programs for drivers on Uber and so forth is a sign that we're starting to deal with the whole problem of retention across customer and supplier. So we have one last story here, and it is related to local selling, but I'll tell you, I don't quite get it. Facebook Marketplace. Essentially, classified advertising on Facebook was launched this week. And why I don't get it is it does not support transactions. It doesn't allow you to integrate with a delivery service. It's basically just an old-fashioned Craigslist. You call somebody, go over and pick up the product. So, Abid, you've been looking at Facebook very closely for many years. What are they going to learn from doing this? This seems like an experiment from 2005.
Well, all right. Well, I mean, let's go back to what you just said. So, would Facebook prefer that when two people on Facebook need to transact and buy and sell a couch, that they leave the website to go to Craigslist? No, they want people to stay on Facebook. And this entire model of buying and selling at the local level has been happening on Facebook for years and years through groups. Right? I mean, every city has a handful of groups that are just based off of local buying and selling. And what Facebook realized was, if we can provide another quote unquote way to delight the user in the form of being able to create a space which is much more structured than a group, then why not do it? And I think that there's a couple of things that are really telling about what Facebook is trying to do here. One of them is that they actually gave the marketplace logo front and center presence on the Facebook app itself, right next to the other major icons, next to notifications, next to find friends. And then the other part of it is that there's completely no cost to this, and there's no Facebook transactions connected to this at all. This is literally just a way for
no risk.
There's no risk. And what I think this is really going to drive towards is more eyeballs on Facebook properties in total, right? If they can take away people from Craigslist and from Kijiji and from all these other types of local transactions websites and keep them on Facebook for as long as possible, that's exactly what Facebook's been trying to do in the long run anyways.
Okay. So still, it has no transaction capability. It has no delivery integration, which would be risk-free. They could simply hand off the transaction. How does this improve on a Craigslist? Or is it simply just offering comparable services?
Before you even think about that, you think about what is the metric they're trying to drive towards. And the metric they're trying to drive towards is total on-premise, on-site time. And if they can maximize...
As a share of a user or as a share of a total audience? As a total audience or share of user?
I think share of user. I mean, if they can increase, the amount of time someone's on a Facebook property by, X number of minutes by making it so there's a safe place for them to do transactions at the local level, why not do it? It's literally just taking the groups function, adding a couple of layers on top of it in terms of, ability to organize, and then making it front and center. All of a sudden, people that were leaving the site to go and do transactions are now staying on site. It's just more convenience. I think that's kind of part of this.
So right now, business is not able to take part in this. Do you guys expect that that will change and that this mode of selling could become part of a marketing outreach plan?
I don't see that. I mean, I don't know, Mike, you have a different opinion, but I think this is specifically designed to attack that one group of people, which is the folks that are doing local buying and selling. This is not to do with e-commerce as much as it is to give users another function that they can use to stay on the website.
I think it is P2P, but another thing that comes to mind as you guys are talking as one possibility is that since this is P2P, and Mitch, you mentioned that transactions are not included. This could be planting the seeds for something transactional in the future because Facebook Messenger is essentially one of the delivery vehicles for Facebook to get into payments. And there are a lot of clues there for that with its conversational commerce stuff, with the fact that David Marcus, who used to be a president at PayPal, now runs Messenger. Now, it could make sense that since Messenger is more of a friend-to-friend, peer-to-peer type of thing, that could integrate in some way into some sort of transactional function, because I know that that's a big area where they want to integrate transactions. This is something that is separate but similar, but showing some of those like parallel directions that Facebook is moving in. So, not sure where that goes, but there's some interesting clues there that could be the way that they start to introduce something transactional through Messenger and this marketplace coming together.
Okay. So what's the time frame for us seeing what you believe will be the first expression of what they've learned from the initial steps here, Ovid? When will we see Facebook Marketplace start to develop into what they intend it to be as compared to an experiment? What would the features be that you would look for to indicate that they are doing so?
I mean, I think any sort of rigidity around transaction or safety or security. So that means things like being able to allow for payments through Facebook, allow validation and verification of ID of who a person that you're buying from is. I mean, I think there's already a piece of that there by making it so that you're dealing between a Facebook user and a Facebook user. But if they can do some sort of other validation on top of that to make it safe, so that you know that you're going to go buy a diamond ring from some random person off of the internet that they've been validated through the Facebook system, I think that'll add some justification. That'll add some sort of weight around the idea that this is something bigger than just a hobby. But at the same time, I still think that this might be a baked product as it is. I don't think that Facebook has a lot of intention around making this into some revenue line, as much as it is just another bullet point around convenience factors to keep Facebook users on Facebook. I think that's kind of what this is.
Great. Well, that's it. That's the news wrap for this week, folks. If you'd like to ask us questions next week, feel free to send an email to me at mratcliffe@biakelsey.com, and I'll bring it up on our next conversation. We're also headed into a series of guests over the next few weeks, and we're looking forward to welcoming them. And if you are going to be in Boston or near Boston on December 5th through 7th, 2016, do please join us at BIA Kelsey Next. It's our annual look ahead, the future of local digital advertising and marketing. This is BIA Kelsey Live, and thanks for another week. Thank you, gentlemen.